Hey beauties and our beasts. I had a long day today, so I really need some skincare time. And tonight, I want you to join me wherever you are. So get cozy, grab your skincare or a warm drink, and take a moment just for yourself, because this is our little time together. So let's slow down, breathe, and take care of yourselves while we dive into something mysterious and chilling. Okay, tonight we're heading deep into one of the wildest places left on Earth, Shenongjia, a vast mist-covered wilderness in Hubei province, China. Home to golden monkeys, clouded leopards, and forests so thick that sunlight barely touches the ground. But what really draws us here is the legend that haunted these mountains for over 2,000 years, China's very own Bigfoot, the Yeren. So this is a story of footprints that crack stone, government-led monster hunts, and encounters that left witnesses shaking for the rest of their lives. So, grab your skincare, settle in, and let's step into the fog. This is the story of Yeren, the wild man of China. Do you ever wonder if there are still beings in this world hiding from us, creatures we have yet to discover? The story we're about to enter begins in the deep, mist-covered forest of Hubei province, China. Shenongjia is huge. So here we're talking about over 3,000 square kilometers of wilderness in western Hubei province. So to put that in perspective, that's actually bigger than Luxembourg. The mountains here are absolutely massive too. The tallest peak reaches over 10,000 feet above sea level. So it's called the roof of central China for a reason. But here's what makes this place really special. It's got some of the last untouched ancient forests left in all of China. So here we're talking about forests that have been growing here since before human civilization. The fog rolls through these mountains so thick you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. And the trees are so dense that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor. In 2016, UNESCO declared this area a World Heritage Site because it's home to creatures you won't find anywhere else on Earth. So in this forest, we can find giant salamanders the size of small dogs, golden monkeys with faces that look almost human. And scientists have found thousands of plant species here, and almost half of them exist nowhere else in China. And for generations, locals have whispered that in these woods lives a creature that even modern science cannot explain. They call it Yeren, literally the wild man. But actually this name is not new. Stories about wild men have been part of Chinese culture for literally thousands of years. Records of creatures presumed to be Yeren had appeared in Chinese history for over 2 millennia. According to historical documents, similar beings were already mentioned in ancient Chinese texts, using terms like Maoren, which means hairy people, or Yeren, wild man. The oldest written mention we can find goes all the way back to around 340 BC. That's over 2,300 years ago. And there was this famous Chinese poet named Yeren who lived during what historians call the Warring States period. So you can think of it like medieval times, but in China when different kingdoms were constantly fighting each other. Yeren was writing poetry about mountain ogres, basically describing large, hairy, human-like creatures living in the forests. And here's the crazy part. He lived right near what we now call Shenongjia, the exact same area where people still report Yeren sightings today. In his work, Jiuge, which means 9 songs, Yeren wrote about Shangui, which means mountain ghosts, strange beings dwelling in the mountains. Later in Chinese history, descriptions of such creatures became more detailed. Particularly during the Tang Dynasty, records of hairy humans and mountain monsters appeared with increasing frequency. Fast forward a few hundred years, and you've got Chinese historians during the Tang Dynasty writing official records about bands of hairy men in the region. And these weren't just stories or legends, these were serious historical documents. According to the Youyang Zazu, a collection of legends compiled around 850 CE during the Tang Dynasty, there existed in southern China a creature called Fei Fei, covered in long hair. This being could reportedly mimic human speech, though its voice sounded like bird calls. According to the records, this creature possessed tremendous strength, capable of lifting 1,000 caddies, which is approximately 600 kilograms, and rumors spread that it attacked or even devoured humans. And that is not all. Other Tang Dynasty records contain vivid descriptions of groups of Maoran, hairy people, climbing fortress walls. There are even chilling accounts of these beings occasionally kidnapping or attacking people. By 1555, local newspapers were reporting stories about groups of Yeren living in mountain caves and coming down to villages to steal dogs and chickens. And that's basically the same behavior people report today. And even more interesting, in 1578, a famous Chinese doctor named Li Shizhen completed what was basically the most important medical textbook of ancient China, the Bancao Gangmu, Compendium of Materia Medica. This comprehensive work contains detailed records of various plants, animals, and medicinal materials, demonstrating the sophisticated level of natural knowledge people possessed at the time. Li Shizhen was a serious scientist for his time, who spent 27 years compiling information from over 800 sources and conducting extensive field research. And the fact that such a rigorous scholar worked during the same era when Yeren legends were prevalent shows how deeply these stories were woven into Chinese culture and natural history. Therefore, modern scholars attempting to reinterpret these ancient records suggest alternative possibilities. These monsters might have actually been primitive tribes living in China's remote, mountainous regions, or perhaps large animals that were misidentified. However, there are clearly aspects that cannot be explained by such rational interpretations. For villagers in Shenlongjia, the Yeren is more than a legend. It embodies both awe and fear, the wildness of nature that resists being tamed. And just like the Yeti in the Himalayas and Bigfoot in North America, the Yeren became China's own mystery, a symbol of what might still be hidden beyond human reach. There are numerous theories as to what this creature might be, whether it's a surviving prehistoric ape, a misidentified bear, or a story that has simply grown in the telling. But there are those who swear they have seen it with their own eyes. So let me tell you about a true witness account from a man named Wang Yu. This guy was no amateur. He was an herbalist, and he'd been wandering the mountains of Shenlongjia for 30 years, gathering herbs and mushrooms. He knew every trail, every animal track, every sound the forest made. Nothing spooked him. But that morning, something was off from the start. The fog was thicker than usual, clinging to everything like it was alive. And the forest was dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just this heavy, suffocating quiet that made his skin crawl. And that is when he saw the footprints. These weren't like anything he'd ever seen. Huge, almost 2 feet long, with deep claw marks gouged into the earth. The smell coming off them was horrible, like rotting meat mixed with something else, something that made his stomach turn. Whatever made these tracks was heavy. The prints had actually cracked the rock underneath. Now, any sane person would have turned around right there, but Wang Yu, curiosity got the better of him. He followed those tracks deeper into the forest, past trees that looked more twisted and wrong the further he went. The trail led him to this massive old tree, probably hundreds of years old, and scattered around its base were bones, lots of bones. Some looked like animals, but others looked way too human. Fresh gouges covered the bark, still oozing dark sap that looked like blood. Clumps of coarse, matted hair hung from the branches like scalps. The air felt thick and poisonous. Wang Yu could barely breathe. Every instinct was screaming at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. And then he heard it, the sound of heavy, guttural breathing. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Wang Yu's blood turned to ice. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound, and what came out of that mist was something massive, at least 8 feet tall. That thing was covered in thick, matted hair, but with patches missing that showed mottled, scarred skin underneath. Its arms hung down to its knees, ending in these enormous hands with fingers that bent wrong and claws caked with dried blood. But the face, it was almost human, but in a horrifying way, like someone had taken a human skull and stretched it like putty. The jaw jutted out, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth, and the eyes, completely black, but not empty. The creature moved without making a sound, gliding rather than walking. When this thing breathed, frost formed in the air, even though it was a warm morning. The grass literally died under its feet. For what felt like hours, they just stared at each other. Wang Yu couldn't move, he couldn't scream, he couldn't do anything but stand there while this thing studied him. Like it was deciding whether he was worth killing or if it should save him for later. Then the creature smiled, rows of razor teeth stretching that impossible mouth into this horrible grin. And that smile was not friendly, it was predatory, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. Then it took a step toward him, and that broke the spell. Wang Yu's survival instincts finally kicked in, and he turned and ran like hell. Behind him, he heard this bone-chilling roar that seemed to shake the entire forest. Then the sound of massive footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, getting closer. Wang Yu had never run so fast in his life. Branches whipped his face, roots tried to trip him, but he kept going. He could hear this thing behind him, smashing through trees, its breathing getting louder and closer. Just when he thought those claws were about to tear into his back, Wang Yu spotted a narrow, rocky crevice between two boulders. He dove through it, scraping his skin raw, but the creature was too big to follow. He heard it slam into the rocks with a frustrated snarl, then circle around, trying to find another way through. Wang Yu didn't wait to see if it could succeed. He scrambled deeper into the crevice until he found another way out, then kept running down the mountain until his lungs were on fire and his legs gave out. When he finally managed to stumble back to the village hours later, he was a broken man. Hair disheveled, hands shaking, eyes like he'd seen the end of the world. When he told his story, the village elders just nodded grimly. They'd heard tales like this before. What you saw, they said, was the Yeren. And Wang Yu never went back into the deep forest, never. He spent the rest of his life in the village center, as far from the trees as possible. Even decades later, he'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, clawing at shadows and babbling about those black eyes watching him. And for sure, it wasn't only him. On misty nights, when the wind carries strange sounds from the mountains, people say they can still see something moving between the trees. Something tall and huge, something that remembers the taste of human fear. Long before Mr. Wang Yu's terrifying encounter, the Yeren was already causing a stir across China. But here's where things get really interesting. In the 1970s, this went from local folklore to a full-blown national obsession. So for about 30 years, from the 1940s to the 1970s, China's government under Mao Zedong had banned pretty much any talk about monsters, ghosts, or supernatural stuff. They thought these stories were just superstition that would distract people from work. But when Mao died in 1976, all that suppressed curiosity just exploded. And in 1976, something happened that changed everything. 6 government officials in China were driving home late one night on a rural highway between 2 counties when their headlights caught something crossing the road. It was a massive, tailless creature covered in reddish fur. The driver actually tried to follow it with the car, and the thing scrambled up a hillside but slipped and ended up right in front of their vehicle. And these weren't random villagers or superstitious locals. These were educated government bureaucrats. So they got out of the car and approached the creature for a closer look. They described it as over 6 feet tall, covered in thick, wavy brown and reddish hair, with a pronounced belly and, well, let's just say very human-like buttocks. This incident was reported in newspapers, and suddenly everyone in China was talking about the Yeren again. And people were writing letters to the government demanding an investigation. The pressure got so intense that the Chinese government actually decided to do something about it. In 1977, they launched what might be one of the biggest monster hunting expeditions in history. So we're talking about 100 people, scientists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, researchers from the Beijing National History Museum, and even soldiers from the Chinese army. They spent months combing through the forests of Shandongjia, interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence. What did they find? Well, they collected hair samples, footprint casts, and even some alleged feces from the creature. And people were describing the same thing over and over. Something that walked upright like a human, stood over 6 feet tall, covered head to toe in reddish brown hair, with a face that was part human, part ape, arms that hung down to its knees, huge feet, and these intense, intelligent eyes. The scientists were excited. They thought they might have discovered a surviving Gigantopithecus, that massive ape that lived in China millions of years ago and was supposed to be extinct. I mean, can you imagine a living prehistoric creature just waiting to be discovered in these remote mountains? The investigation continued into the 1980s. At one point, they had over 1,700 researchers working on this. One expedition leader found a trail of footprints that stretched for over a mile. And the footprints were about 18 inches long. But here is where it gets frustrating. The more they investigated, the more the evidence started falling apart. Hair samples turned out to be from bears or monkeys. Footprints matched known animals. By the late 1980s, most scientists concluded there just wasn't enough solid evidence to prove the Yeren existed. But, and this is important, the sightings never stopped. Even after the official investigations ended, people kept reporting encounters. Park rangers, hunters, tourists, they all kept seeing something in those mountains. In 2008, a ranger named Yuan told researchers about an incident from 1995. He was on patrol at about 7,000 feet elevation when he spotted something through his binoculars from about 500 yards away. It was this massive, reddish-brown hairy figure just lying in a meadow, sunbathing like it didn't have a care in the world. When he called out to it, thinking it might be a person in fur clothing, the thing got up and disappeared into the forest. And Yu Hao made a plaster cast of footprints he found, 15 inches long, showing what looked like 5 human-like toes, but much, much bigger than any human foot. Another expedition leader found a trail of over 1,000 footprints stretching for more than a mile through the forest. The clearest print was over 18 inches long, so think about that for a second. That is bigger than most humans' forearms. But here is what really gets scientists excited: the hair analysis. When researchers from Fudan University, that's one of China's most prestigious research institutions, analyzed hair samples collected over the years, they found something weird. The iron to zinc ratio was 50 times higher than human hair and 7 times higher than any known primate. Whatever left that hair behind, it wasn't human, and it wasn't any ape or monkey we know about. Since the beginning of this century alone, there have been over 300 reported sightings of the Yeren in Shandongjia. So when people try to dismiss the Yeren as just a modern myth or misidentification, you have to ask yourself, how do you explain more than 2,000 years of consistent reports from the exact same geographical area, describing the exact same creature with the exact same behaviors? In 2008, American scientist Jeffrey Meldrum, one of the leading experts on Bigfoot research in the United States, teamed up with Chinese researchers to analyze the Yeren evidence. Meldrum from Idaho State University's Department of Biological Sciences joined Professor Zhou Guoxing on a research expedition to the Shandongjia National Nature Reserve to collect fresh evidence and examine existing findings. And their analysis proved intriguing. According to Meldrum and Guoxing's 2012 report, footprint casts suggested human-like plantigrade locomotion, meaning the creature walked with its toes, soles, and heels supporting its weight, just like humans do. And the prints showed 5 human-like toes, without claws, at the end. Even Meldrum, a seasoned skeptic who had examined countless cryptid claims, admitted that while most samples could be explained away as known animals, there are a few that are genuinely puzzling and didn't match any known species. More recently, Chinese scientists have turned to big data and artificial intelligence to crack the mystery. They gathered decades of eyewitness accounts, photographs, and reports, feeding them into computer models to look for patterns that human researchers might have missed. The results revealed intriguing geographical and temporal patterns. Sightings clustered in specific regions and appeared most frequently at certain times of year, particularly in the Shandongjia area. Whether this reflects the behavior of an unknown creature adapting to seasonal changes, or simply the rhythms of human imagination and local folklore traditions, remains hotly debated among researchers. When theorizing about what the Yeren could be, many zoologists believe the creature is a surviving Gigantopithecus, a giant bipedal primate believed to have gone extinct roughly 300,000 years ago. The Gigantopithecus is estimated to be around 2.7 meters, which is 9 feet in height. Another popular theory is that the Yeren are, in fact, a small pack of evolved orangutans. Hubei capitalizes on the creature's infamy to attract tourists to remote villages within the province. A statue depicting a female Yeren and her child exists within the nature preserve, serving as another popular tourist attraction. It contains a nice collection of museums, including one that is devoted to the Yeren, China's version of the Yeti or Bigfoot. So if you're curious, you can visit yourself. So what do we make of the Yeren? Villagers told stories to warn their children not to wander too deep into the forest. Scholars debated whether these hairy beings were remnants of forgotten tribes. And scientists, armed with microscopes and DNA sequencers, still find themselves caught between evidence and mystery. But perhaps the truth of the Yeren lies not only in biology, but in what it represents. It's a mirror of our fears and desires, the fear of the unknown and the longing to believe that the world is still bigger, wilder, and more mysterious than we can explain. To this day, the Yeren remains cloaked in mystery. The truth is, no one has ever proven its existence. Even today, Wang Yu says that whenever he steps into those mountains, he feels it, that invisible gaze at his back. And perhaps somewhere in the depths of Hubei's forest, something still breathes quietly, unseen, waiting. So, what do you believe? Is the Yeren nothing more than a legend, or is it a living being that has yet to step fully into the light? The truth in the end is yours to decide. Okay, that is a wrap for today. See you guys soon in our next episode. Bye bye.